Welcome to the LowCarbUSA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
Okay, so Amber Hearn, I have you with me this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so your big claim to fame is that you're a pretty avid carnivore, and I've never really got to the bottom of why you particularly have gone that route. So let's start with just going through your story, why it is that you've taken on this way of life, and tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. It's a funny claim to fame because I've actually been thinking about ketogenic diets, plain without the carnivore, for a long time. I've been on a low-carb diet for 22 years now, I think.
Wow.
I started in 97, and I was happily humming along on low carb for a very long time. But I had started low carb because of weight, and I started carnivore actually because of weight also, because for whatever reason, after I had been on a low carb diet for about 12 years. I had had a couple pregnancies, and I had been on antidepressants, and there are many plausible possible reasons for why, but I'd begun to gain weight again even though I was on a low carb diet. And this really, really bothered me for a variety of reasons, personal, but also because, I had studied the low carb diet and I couldn't understand why I seemed to be doing everything right and it still wasn't enough. So I found a bunch of people online, not a large group, but enough people that it was interesting that they were eating this way, just not eating any plants. They called it ZC for zero carb at that time. So this was the end of 2008. And I didn't really like that name because zero carb, it's not really true. There's always trace amounts of carbs and things. And also there are things that have no carbs, like say canola oil, that a carnivore would never eat. So, but anyway, a lot of those people claimed that they were in the same situation as me. They were low carb, but it just wasn't meeting their goals. And when they got rid of all the plants, that's when their weight started moving again. And so I thought, well, I can give that a short-term trial. Maybe it'll bring me back to the weight I want to be, and then I can go back to my regular low carb diet. But what happened at that time when I tried it is something very unexpected for me, which was that this depression, which had later been actually re-diagnosed as a form of bipolar disorder, came to a standstill when I took the plants out of my diet. And so that was a really profound thing for me personally, a huge life changer. And that is why I'm still eating a carnivore diet today, because even though I started eating that way with the aim of losing weight, what happened to my mood and my psychiatry became much more important.
Yes. So, I mean, I've heard a few people that have kind of tried it out as an elimination diet to start with. Georgia Eid is one of those, and other friends of ours, Steve and Melody Barons, try it as an elimination diet to start with, and then kind of with the idea that you'll start adding stuff back in to understand which particular plant was maybe causing the problem, and then finding that it felt so good, and it was such an amazing experience that it was like, okay, I'm not going back. I'm going to stick with this. And so I've heard a lot of people go that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon, because I think everybody has the experience that when they think about doing that, it just seems so overwhelmingly restrictive that the goal is always for it to be temporary. And why not, right? I mean, I think definitely you should always eat the foods that strike the right balance for you, of giving you the best health that you can have while giving you the most pleasure in your life too. But I think you're quite right. Many people suddenly feel so good. They had no idea that they were going to feel this good, that they could even feel this good. I mean, sometimes people, you get so used to something being part of your life that you don't even recognize that it's not as good as it could be until you feel better. And so then there's this, well, why would I ever want to go back? And that's the experience that I had as well.
So maybe that, because we were chatting a little bit before we started this, and I know there's some people that are what they call, I think Stephen Melody call it ketovore, where they kind of carnivore, but they still have a couple of things, and I'm kind of feel like I'm in that boat where I still want to eat avocados and still have some macadamia nuts around that I don't eat every day, but every now and then a handful of those things to get some fat in and stuff is very useful for me. But I've also heard a lot of carnivores that are really, really strict, and you get on some of these Facebook groups and that, and they get pretty militant about it almost. Where they, where they won't even include spices and stuff on their steak because, black pepper or whatever is essentially a plant. What is the importance of being that strict, and when would someone want to be that strict, and when is it okay for someone to maybe not be that strict?
That's a great question. The way that I like to think about it is, it depends on what phase of learning you're in. So I think it's really important, if you want to find out if a carnivore diet can improve your life, that you give a sufficiently long stretch where you are strict, that you can find out how these different things that you might be introducing are affecting you. So I usually advocate for something like 1 month. Other people think that it should be maybe 3 months or even 6 months of a quite strict carnivore diet before you decide that, oh, this doesn't really help me, because you wouldn't have given it a fair trial if you're eating, say, avocados or other things during the period where you're trying to figure out how helpful it's going to be. But once you've really become familiar with how it feels to be on a carnivore diet, then I think anything is game, right? Because it's your life, and there's really two possibilities. Like, either if a carnivore diet has given you some benefits that you can feel, then for a given food that you might want to add back, either it doesn't have any effect and you feel just as great with it, in which case you might as well have it, or it does have some effect and then you get to choose even then still, right? Like, how worth it is it to me? Do I want to have it sometimes and pay the price, or do I want to never have it? And so I guess once you've become familiar with what a carnivore diet can do for you, then you're able to evaluate what happens when you're less strict. And so, for example, I was very strict when I first started the carnivore diet, but then I got to a place where I felt comfortable saying, hey, what would happen if I had a piece of like 100% chocolate? And I found that didn't seem to bother me. And the same thing is true with pickles. When I go for sashimi, I will eat the wasabi. And so there are a few things that I know don't have a big impact on me. I still don't eat them very often, but I feel like they're safe. There are other things, like I once tried using psyllium husk because I wanted to experiment with, people were saying that if you ate a lot of fiber, then this would reduce your appetite and it would affect your eating habits, and I wanted to see if that was true. And I immediately had a really adverse psychiatric-like episode in response to the psyllium. So I don't eat that. But for the most part, I haven't played around like we were talking about before, because the cost to not feeling my best is just too high, and I'm more I don't yearn for a salad. So I haven't really spent a lot of time trying to figure out what things I could add back in. in principle, I think that people should feel like there's no extra badge for being pure about it. It's not a moral thing.
Right.
So I guess that's just the difference between giving it a good chance and then balancing your life pleasures.
Figuring out what works, what's best for you. Yeah. I
Yeah.
know Steve Barron's, when I interviewed him, Melody, about this, because you mentioned the thing about people fear that it's such a restrictive thing, but he made a comment there, and he said, you know, eating a ribeye steak every day never gets old.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
I think a lot of people that do start to realize that it's not really restrictive, because you're eating something that you love all the time. So people don't get tired of that, you know, or some people, or a lot of people don't get tired of that. I think one of the other things, big misconceptions that a lot of people have, is that you have to have plants because of the nutrients. And I know George has done a breakdown on that, but maybe help people understand why it is that that's really a fallacy, and that you can get everything you need on the carnivore diet in spades.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I also would point to Georgia Eads' work, but almost every nutrient that you can name that we've identified as an essential nutrient is more available actually in some form of animal food than it is in plant forms. There are a couple of exceptions, but there's nothing that you can't get at all. And one of the nuances about that is that some of those nutrients you can only get if you're also eating organ meats, and a lot of people don't like to eat organ meats. Unfortunately, I think they're quite delicious. But if you look at charts that say, can you get vitamins from animal sources? You can get them all, but often you would have to include a food like liver to be able to get it. And there's a great controversy within the carnivore community of whether you actually need to get the amount of certain vitamins that we've identified in the context of a high carb diet that you would have to get. So there are some subtleties there. Vitamin C is the one that stands out the most because that's the one where plant foods actually do. It is easier to get vitamin C from plants than from meat, but the bottom line is you can get vitamin C even from your ribeye steak, enough to definitely avoid having a vitamin C deficiency in the form of scurvy. So there's been a lot written about the different vitamins, but it's absolutely a myth that you need vegetables for that reason.
Right. And I mean, I also feel like, you know, the small amount of vitamin C that you maybe do need is way less than what the current RDA kind of numbers specify. And I've heard a lot of talk about the fact that the improvement in your health and the change in your metabolic system, basically, when you go keto, negates the need to a large extent for a lot of vitamin C, and that there's the smaller amount that you do really only need then is easily obtainable through animal sources if you're eating those. I know myself, I'm all over organ meats. You know, we've got we do beef livers and chicken livers, and we make curry with kidneys and steak and kidneys, and often get an ox heart or something in there as well. And so we're always throwing those things in. Would you feel like if people can't get their heads around eating organ meat at all, that they would still need to be looking at supplementation of some kind? Or do you feel like just eating steak? I know Sean Baker I was talking to him like a couple of days ago, and he's just starting to train now for his next attempt at the indoor rowing world record, improve even his current record. And he's talking about for the next 3 months eating just red meat, eating just steak, and even including the little bits of fish and salmon and the organ meats and that he normally has in his diet, that he's actually even eliminating those and just going full on red meat for 3 months, because he feels his best and his strongest when he does that. That's kind of weird to believe that that's really true.
Well, I think we should not ignore the fact that there are people in the carnivore ZC community who have been eating this way as long as I have, which is 10 years or longer even. And there are some of those people who don't eat organs at all, or they did at the beginning and they stopped. And so that, it's anecdotal, but
Right.
you would think that if there were a problem, it would be showing up by now. And the other thing is that a lot of the vitamins that we're talking about are things that you could definitely at least put off thinking about if you're going to do something for 3 months. I don't think you have to worry about getting depleted in, say, folate or vitamin C at the level of eating just steak. But if you decide that it's something you're going to do long term, then because the risks are unknown, you're going to have to make a personal decision. Am I worried about it enough that I think I should add organs or add supplements? Or do I trust that either these anecdotes will be the same case for me, or that I'm willing to reassess at a later time or take blood values or watch out for certain things?
Right. Okay. And main thing, I think, in the end, as you've mentioned before, is like see how it works for you and monitor it closely. And if you find some adverse effect happening, then change it up and start introducing something else. All right. Well, that's fascinating, man. Thanks so much. We're kind of coming to the end of the time here. If anybody wants to get hold of you to ask more about this or follow what you're doing, because you're actually really active in this community, how would they go about getting hold of you?
Well, I'm far too active on Twitter. I can be found there. My handle is Keto Carnivore, and I'm usually responsive to questions. So that's one of the best ways to find me.
Okay. And I'll put that in the notes as well. So if people didn't catch that, they can, at Keto Carnivore, right?
That's right.
All right. And I'll put it in the notes too. Thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it, Amber. And hopefully we see you at another event pretty soon.
Thanks for having me.
All right. You've been listening to an episode of the LowCarbUSA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/LowCarbUSA.